tiny bear, cub, trapped in a flooded tunnel, a child's courageous act, moved onlookers to tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, a relentless downpour that transformed the gentle streams of Pinewood Valley into angry, swollen torrents. 10-year-old Noah Thompson pressed his face against the window of his grandmother's cottage, watching lightning crack across the steel-gray sky. The storm had trapped him indoors all weekend, and his restlessness had reached a breaking point. "Grandma, I'm just going to check on the tree fort," Noah called, already pulling on his yellow raincoat. "I won't go far, I promise." His grandmother, Eleanor, looked up from her knitting with concern etched across her weathered face. "Noah, honey, it's dangerous out there. The creek's probably overflowed the banks by now." "I'll be careful," Noah insisted, his blue eyes wide with earnest determination. "I just want to make sure our fort didn't wash away. Dad and I worked so hard on it last summer." Eleanor sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of Noah's jaw, the same expression his father had worn at that age. 20 minutes, no more, and take the walkie-talkie. Call me if anything seems wrong, anything at all." Noah nodded eagerly, shoving the device into his pocket before his grandmother could change her mind. The moment he stepped onto the porch, the sound of the rain intensified, drumming against his hood like thousands of tiny fingers. The world smelled of wet earth and pine, the familiar woods transformed into something wild and mysterious. The path to the creek normally took 5 minutes, but the mud slowed Noah's progress, sucking at his boots with each step. By the time he reached the ridge overlooking the water, his pants were splattered with mud up to his knees. What he saw below made him freeze. The usually peaceful creek had become a churning, muddy monster that clawed at its banks, devouring chunks of soil with each surge. Noah stood transfixed, both terrified and fascinated by nature's raw power. His eyes followed the racing current downstream toward the old drainage tunnel that ran beneath the hiking trail. That's when he heard it, a sound so unexpected that at first he thought he'd imagined it. A high-pitched, frightened cry that somehow cut through the storm's cacophony. Noah tilted his head, listening intently. There it was again, a plaintive wail that made his chest tighten with instinctive concern. Carefully, he made his way down the slippery slope, using exposed tree roots as handholds. The crying grew louder as he approached the tunnel, a concrete pipe about 4 feet in diameter that was now half submerged in the rising floodwater. Noah edged closer, careful to stay on higher ground. Peering into the dark mouth of the tunnel, he gasped. 2 tiny, terrified eyes reflected back at him, eyes that belonged to a small, trembling bear cub. The creature was clinging desperately to a narrow ledge inside the tunnel, its fur soaked and its small body shivering violently as water rushed beneath it. "Oh no," Noah whispered, his heart racing. The cub couldn't have been more than a few months old, its wet fur making it look even smaller and more vulnerable. Each time the water surged, the frightened animal scrambled to maintain its precarious position, letting out that heartbreaking cry. Noah glanced around frantically, looking for any sign of the mother bear, knowing how dangerous she would be if she believed her cub was threatened. The forest stood silent except for the storm, but that didn't mean she wasn't nearby. Still, he couldn't just leave the helpless cub to drown. His grandmother's warnings echoed in his mind as another flash of lightning illuminated the scene. The water was rising quickly, already lapping at the cub's tiny paws. Noah knew he needed help, but there wasn't time to run back to the cottage. With trembling fingers, he pulled out the walkie-talkie. "Grandma," he called, his voice shaking. "Grandma, can you hear me? There's a bear cub trapped in the drainage tunnel. It's going to drown." The device crackled with static before Eleanor's voice came through, distorted but clear enough. "Noah, get away from there right now." The mother could be anywhere. "But Grandma, the water's rising really fast. It needs help now." Noah pleaded, watching as another surge forced the cub to scramble higher. "I'm going to call for help on your phone." Without waiting for her response, Noah shoved the walkie-talkie back into his pocket and pulled out his grandmother's old cell phone that she let him carry for emergencies. His fingers trembled as he dialed 911, praying someone would answer quickly. While the phone rang, Noah's eyes remained fixed on the frightened cub. Its cries had become weaker, its movements more desperate. In that moment, looking into those terrified eyes, Noah felt something shift inside him, a fierce protectiveness that pushed aside his fear. This wasn't just some wild animal, it was a baby fighting for its life. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice finally came through. "There's a bear cub trapped in a drainage tunnel near Willow Creek Road," Noah explained hurriedly. "The tunnel's flooding, and the cub is going to drown. Please, we need help." "I understand you're concerned about the animal," the operator replied cautiously. "But I need you to stay well away from there. Is there an adult with you?" "No, but my grandma knows where I am," Noah answered, frustration building as he watched the water rise another inch. "Please, it doesn't have much time." "I'll contact animal control right away," the operator assured him. "But you need to move to a safe location. Bear cubs are never alone for long." As if to confirm the operator's warning, a low, rumbling growl emanated from the trees on the opposite bank. Noah's blood turned to ice as he slowly turned to see a large black bear emerging from the forest. Her eyes locked on the tunnel where her cub was trapped. The mother bear's fur was slick with rain, her powerful body tense as she paced the bank, clearly agitated but unable to reach her baby through the rushing water. Noah froze, the phone still pressed to his ear, caught between the desperate cub and its frightened, dangerous mother. The operator was saying something, but her words were lost in the thunder that crashed overhead. In that breathless moment, Noah realized help wouldn't arrive in time. The cub let out another cry, weaker than before, as the water surged again. "I have to do something," Noah whispered, more to himself than to the emergency operator still trying to get his attention. He slowly lowered the phone, keeping his eyes on the mother bear across the swollen creek. The massive animal reared up on her hind legs, releasing a roar that seemed to shake the very air. But Noah realized she wasn't focusing on him. Her attention was fixed entirely on her struggling cub, her powerful body trembling with what could only be described as anguish. "I'm going to call you back," Noah said into the phone before hanging up, ignoring the operator's protests. He couldn't just stand by and watch the cub drown. The mother bear couldn't cross the raging water, and help wouldn't arrive in time. It was up to him. His mind raced, searching for a solution. Direct rescue seemed impossible. He couldn't reach into the tunnel without being swept away himself. Then his eyes landed on a fallen branch nearby, about 6 feet long and sturdy enough to support weight. An idea began to form. Moving slowly so as not to startle the mother bear, Noah edged toward the branch. The walkie-talkie in his pocket crackled with his grandmother's voice, but he couldn't risk answering it now. Every second counted. "It's okay," he called softly to the bear cub, unsure if the frightened animal could even hear him over the storm. "I'm going to help you." The branch was heavier than he expected, its waterlogged wood requiring all his strength to drag toward the tunnel entrance. With each step, Noah cast nervous glances at the mother bear, who continued her agitated pacing on the opposite bank, occasionally standing on her hind legs to better see into the tunnel. A crack of lightning illuminated the scene, followed almost instantly by a deafening boom of thunder. The sudden noise startled the cub, causing it to lose its grip. For one heart-stopping moment it slipped toward the rushing water. Noah cried out in alarm, but miraculously the tiny animal managed to catch itself on a small outcropping of concrete, now barely above the waterline. Noah knew it was now or never. Positioning himself as securely as possible on the slippery bank, he extended the branch toward the tunnel opening, trying to create a bridge or platform for the cub. "Come on," he urged, his voice gentle despite his pounding heart. "You can do it. Just climb onto the branch." The cub stared at the offered branch, its tiny body trembling with exhaustion and fear. It seemed to understand this was its only chance, yet remained frozen in place, too terrified to move. "Please," Noah whispered, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "Please try." Another surge of water washed through the tunnel, this one powerful enough to partially dislodge the cub from its perch. In desperation, the tiny animal lunged for the branch, its front paws scrabbling for purchase on the wet wood. For a terrible moment Noah thought it would fall, but those tiny claws dug in, and the cub slowly, painfully pulled itself onto the makeshift bridge. Noah held his breath, struggling to keep the branch steady as the small creature inched toward him. The mother bear let out another roar, this one sounding almost encouraging to Noah's ears. The cub moved painstakingly slowly, its waterlogged fur making it look even smaller and more pitiful. Just as the cub neared the end of the branch, a new sound cut through the storm. Voices and the splashing of approaching footsteps. Noah glanced back to see 3 adults making their way down the ridge behind him. His grandmother, looking terrified, accompanied by their neighbor Mr. Jenkins and a uniformed park ranger. "Noah, get away from there!" Eleanor cried, her face pale with fear. "I've almost got it, Grandma," Noah called back, unable to abandon the rescue now. "Just a few more seconds." The adults froze at the sight of the mother bear across the creek, the ranger slowly raising his tranquilizer gun as a precaution. Mr. Jenkins put a restraining hand on Eleanor's arm when she tried to rush forward. "That boy's got more courage than sense," Mr. Jenkins muttered, though there was unmistakable admiration in his voice. The cub had reached the end of the branch now, its frightened eyes fixed on Noah. Just inches separated them, but the tiny animal hesitated, unsure of this human's intentions. "It's okay," Noah said softly, extending his free hand palm up, as he'd seen animal handlers do on nature shows. "I won't hurt you." For what seemed like an eternity, the cub stared at him, its small chest heaving with exhaustion. Then, with one final desperate effort, it lunged from the branch toward solid ground. Noah's heart soared as the cub's paws touched earth, but his relief was short-lived. The sudden movement caused the branch to shift, and Noah felt his footing give way on the slippery bank. Time seemed to slow as he felt himself falling toward the churning water, the world tilting sickeningly around him. A scream, his grandmother's, pierced the air as Noah hit the icy water with a splash, the current immediately pulling at his clothes, trying to drag him downstream toward the tunnel. "Noah!" Eleanor's anguished cry rose above the storm as she broke free from Mr. Jenkins' restraining hand and rushed forward. The cold was shocking, stealing Noah's breath and sending panic coursing through his veins. He flailed desperately, trying to find purchase on the slippery creek bed. For one terrifying moment he went under, the muddy water filling his nose and mouth. He surfaced, gasping, to see the ranger rushing toward him. removing his jacket as he prepared to jump in after the boy. But before the ranger could reach him, Noah felt something solid beneath his grasping hands, the half-submerged root of a streamside tree. With a strength born of a sheer desperation, he pulled himself toward it, fighting the current with every ounce of his being. "Grab my hand." The ranger was at the edge now, extending his arm as far as he could without falling in himself. Noah stretched, his fingers brushing the ranger's before finally connecting in a firm grip. With a mighty heave, the ranger pulled him from the water's grasp, dragging him onto the muddy bank where he collapsed, coughing and shivering. His grandmother was there instantly, wrapping him in her arms, sobbing with relief. "Noah Thompson, don't you ever scare me like that again." Noah could only nod weakly, his body trembling from cold and adrenaline. But even as his grandmother held him, his eyes searched frantically for the bear cub. Had it escaped, or had his near drowning distracted everyone from the animal's plight? To his immense relief, he spotted the cub a few yards away, huddled beneath a fallen log, still shivering but safe from the flood. As if sensing his gaze, the tiny animal turned its head, meeting Noah's eyes in a moment of connection that transcended the barriers between their species. Across the creek, the mother bear had gone silent, watching intently as the drama unfolded. With the cub now visible on their side of the water, her agitation seemed to increase, her powerful body tense as she assessed the situation. "The mother's going to try to cross," the ranger warned, keeping his voice low and calm. "We need to back away slowly and give the cub space. If she sees us as a threat to her baby, this could get dangerous." Noah nodded in understanding, though it pained him to think of leaving the rescue incomplete. But will the cub be able to find its way to her? The water's still so high. The ranger helped Noah to his feet, supporting him as they began to retreat. Bears are smarter and more capable than you might think. The best thing we can do now is give them space. As the humans backed away toward the ridge, the mother bear made her move. To everyone's amazement, instead of attempting to cross the raging creek directly, she began to make her way upstream, apparently searching for a narrower crossing point. "Smart girl," the ranger murmured approvingly. "She knows her limits." From their vantage point on higher ground, they watched as the mother bear found a fallen tree that created a natural bridge across the narrowest part of the creek. With impressive agility for such a large animal, she carefully traversed the makeshift crossing, her powerful muscles tensed for balance. Once safely across, she paused, lifting her nose to the air to catch her cub's scent. The tiny bear, sensing its mother's approach, emerged from beneath the log and began making its way toward her, moving with surprising speed despite its ordeal. "Look at that," Mr. Jenkins whispered, a rare smile softening his weathered face. "That's something you don't see every day." The reunion between mother and cub brought unexpected tears to Noah's eyes. The larger bear gently nuzzled her baby, inspecting it for injuries while making soft, huffing sounds that seemed to convey both relief and reassurance. The cub pressed close to its mother's side, finally safe after its harrowing experience. For a breathtaking moment, the mother bear lifted her head and stared directly at the humans watching from the ridge. Noah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. There was an intelligence in those dark eyes, a consciousness that seemed to recognize what had transpired. "Is she thanking us?" Noah asked softly. The ranger placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I've worked with wildlife for 20 years, and I'll tell you this. Animals understand more than we give them credit for. Whether she's thanking you or not, I think she knows you helped her baby." With one last look at the humans, the mother bear turned and guided her cub into the forest, both disappearing among the trees as the rain finally began to ease. Noah leaned against his grandmother, suddenly exhausted, but filled with a warm sense of accomplishment unlike anything he'd ever experienced. "I couldn't just let it drown, Grandma," he said quietly. Eleanor's arms tightened around him. "I know, sweetheart. You've got your father's heart." Though her voice still trembled with leftover fear, there was unmistakable pride in her eyes as she looked down at her grandson. "But next time, wait for help before you try to be a hero, okay?" Noah nodded, though in his heart he knew he would make the same choice again. The memory of those frightened eyes looking to him for help would stay with him forever, along with the knowledge that sometimes waiting wasn't an option when a life hung in the balance. As they made their way back to the cottage, the storm clouds began to part, allowing weak sunlight to filter through. It seemed fitting somehow, a new beginning after the storm, both for the rescued bear cub and for Noah, who had discovered a courage within himself he hadn't known existed. Word of Noah's daring rescue spread through Pinewood Valley with the speed that only small-town news can travel. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Trees stripped of weaker branches, streams still swollen but no longer raging, and muddy debris scattered across once familiar paths. Noah sat at his grandmother's kitchen table, wrapped in a thick blanket despite the warmth of the room. The events of the previous day had left him with a mild fever and a cough that worried Eleanor enough to keep him home from school. He stared out the window, lost in thought, reliving those intense moments by the flooded tunnel. The doorbell's chime startled him from his reverie. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, returning moments later with a tall woman in a forest green uniform. "Noah, this is Dr. Olivia Chen from the Wildlife Conservation Center," his grandmother explained. "She'd like to talk to you about yesterday." Dr. Chen smiled warmly, pulling up a chair across from Noah. "I hear you're quite the hero," she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "The ranger who was there filed a report, and I wanted to come thank you personally." Noah ducked his head, suddenly shy. "I just did what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong, Doctor," Chen replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Most people would have called for help and kept their distance, which, to be clear, is usually the right thing to do with wild animals. But sometimes circumstances call for immediate action, and you showed remarkable courage and resourcefulness." She pulled out a tablet and turned it to show Noah a series of photos. "We've been tracking this particular mother bear and her cub for the past few months as part of our conservation program. This is Stella and her cub, whom we've been calling Pip." Noah leaned forward, fascinated by the images of the bears in their natural habitat. Stella foraging for berries, Pip practicing his climbing skills on a fallen log. They looked so different in the sunlight, their fur glossy and their movements confident. Nothing like the desperate creatures he'd encountered in the storm. "Are they okay? After yesterday, I mean?" Noah asked, concern evident in his voice. Dr. Chen nodded. "One of our tracking team spotted them this morning. Pip seems no worse for wear, thankfully. Bears are remarkably resilient creatures." She paused, studying Noah's face. "Would you like to tell me exactly what happened in your own words? It would help with our research." Noah hesitated, glancing at his grandmother, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, he began to recount the events of the previous day. Hearing the cub's cries, seeing it trapped in the flooded tunnel, his desperate plan with the branch, and finally, the heart-stopping moment when he fell into the water. Dr. Chen listened attentively, occasionally making notes, but mostly just absorbing his story. When he finished, she remained silent for a moment. "Noah, what you did was extraordinary," she finally said. But I want to be very clear about something. It was also extremely dangerous. Mother bears are among the most protective animals on Earth. If Stella had perceived you as a threat to Pip, things could have ended very differently. Noah swallowed hard, remembering the bear's powerful muscles and sharp claws. I know, but she seemed to understand I was trying to help. Perhaps she did, Dr. Chen acknowledged with a slight smile. Bears are highly intelligent animals with complex emotional lives, but we can never predict how wildlife will react in stressful situations, which is why we typically advise keeping a safe distance. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Nevertheless, what you did was brave and compassionate, and our center wanted to give you something to remember it by. Noah carefully unwrapped the gift to find a beautifully carved wooden bear, small enough to fit in his palm. The craftsmanship was exquisite, capturing the power and grace of the animal in smooth, polished wood. "It's beautiful," he breathed, running his finger along the curve of the bear's back. "It was carved by a local artist who works with our center," Dr. Chen explained. "Each one is unique, just like each bear in our forests." The doorbell rang again, and this time Eleanor returned with several more visitors. Mr. Jenkins, the ranger from yesterday, whose name, Noah learned, was Ranger Mike Holloway. And to Noah's surprise, his school principal, Mrs. Winters, along with a photographer from the local newspaper. "Hope you don't mind the invasion," Ranger Holloway said with a grin. "Word got out about our little bear whisperer here?" Noah blushed deeply, shrinking into his blanket. "I'm not a bear whisperer." "Maybe not," Mrs. Winters said, her usually stern face softened with admiration. "But you're certainly a young man of exceptional character. The whole town is talking about what you did." The photographer, a cheerful woman named Jenna, asked if she could take a few pictures for the Pinewood Gazette. "Local boy saves bear cub from flood. It's the most exciting news we've had around here in months." While Noah posed somewhat awkwardly with Dr. Chen and Ranger Holloway, Eleanor pulled Mrs. Winters aside, their voices low, but still audible to Noah's keen ears. "He's always been a sensitive child," his grandmother was saying. "Ever since his parents' accident, he feels things so deeply. Sometimes I worry it makes life harder for him." Mrs. Winters nodded thoughtfully. "Children like Noah experience the world differently. They carry burdens, but also see beauty that others miss. Yesterday shows the kind of person he's becoming." Their words stirred something in Noah's chest, a mixture of pride and a deep, aching sadness that never completely left him. The accident that had taken his parents 2 years ago had changed everything, leaving him in his grandmother's care while the adults sorted out what would happen next. Sometimes it felt like he'd been holding his breath ever since, waiting for his real life to begin again. After the photos were taken and the visitors began to depart, Ranger Holloway hung back, crouching down to meet Noah at eye level. "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday," he said, his weathered face serious. "And I wanted to ask if you might be interested in joining our Junior Ranger program this summer. We could use someone with your instincts and heart." Noah's eyes widened. "Really? But I messed up. I fell in the water." Ranger Holloway chuckled. "Being brave doesn't mean being perfect, Noah. It means doing what's right even when you're scared." He handed Noah a brochure. "Think about it. Program starts in June." After everyone had left, Noah sat quietly at the kitchen table, turning the wooden bear over in his hands, thinking about Pip and Stella somewhere in the forest, continuing their lives together because of one moment of courage. His grandmother placed a steaming mug of hot chocolate before him. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Noah looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you think Mom and Dad would have been proud of what I did?" Eleanor's breath caught, and she sat down heavily beside him, drawing him into a fierce embrace. "Oh, Noah, they would have been bursting with pride, just like I am." She pulled back to look into his eyes. "Your mother always said you had a special soul. Yesterday proved just how right she was." Noah leaned into his grandmother's familiar warmth, the wooden bear clutched tightly in his hand. For the first time in a long while, the ache of missing his parents was accompanied by something else, a sense that perhaps they could still see him, still know the person he was becoming. Outside the window, a robin landed on the bird feeder, a sign of spring's return after the violent storm. Noah watched it, thinking about new beginnings and the strange, unpredictable ways that lives, human and animal alike, could intersect and change each other forever. The following week brought an unseasonable warmth to Pinewood Valley, as if nature were trying to apologize for the storm's fury. The creek had receded to its normal boundaries, though evidence of the flooding remained in the debris caught in tree branches and the new contours of the eroded banks. Noah's fever had passed, allowing him to return to school, where he found himself the unexpected center of attention. The story of his bear cub rescue had transformed him overnight from the quiet new kid, the orphan who lived with his grandmother, into someone other students sought out at lunch and during recess. "Did you really almost get eaten by a bear?" demanded Tommy Fletcher, a freckle-faced boy who had barely spoken to Noah before. "No," Noah replied, uncomfortable with the exaggerations that had attached themselves to his story. "The mother bear was across the creek the whole time. She couldn't reach us." "But weren't you scared?" pressed Lily Morgan, her hazel eyes wide with fascination. Noah considered the question seriously. "Yes," he admitted, "but not of the bears exactly, more of the water, and of not being able to help the cub in time." His honest answer seemed to impress his classmates even more than the embellished versions circulating through the school. By the end of the day, Noah had received 3 invitations for playdates, more social engagement than he'd experienced in the entire 2 months since moving to Pinewood Valley to live with his grandmother. Walking home that afternoon, Noah was surprised to find Ranger Holloway leaning against his truck at the school entrance. "Hope you don't mind the ambush," the ranger said with a friendly smile. "I was heading out to check on some of the flood damage and thought you might want to come along. Your grandmother already gave permission if you're interested." Noah's heart leaped at the opportunity. Yes, please. I'd like that very much." The ranger's truck smelled of pine needles and coffee as they drove through town and out toward the Forest Service Road. Noah sat quietly, watching the familiar landscape pass by, noticing details he'd never paid attention to before. The way certain trees had begun to bud despite the recent storm, the flash of a cardinal's red wings against new green growth. "So, how's the local celebrity holding up?" Ranger Holloway asked, his eyes twinkling with good humor. Noah wrinkled his nose. "I wish people would stop calling me that. I just did what anyone would do." The ranger chuckled. "That's what all the real heroes say." He grew more serious. "But between you and me, I think what makes your story special to folks around here isn't just what you did, but why you did it." "What do you mean?" Noah asked, puzzled. "Well," Ranger Holloway said thoughtfully, "lots of people like animals in the abstract. They donate to wildlife funds or post cute pictures online. But when faced with a wild animal in distress, one that could be dangerous, most people's instinct is to keep their distance. Your first thought was for the cub's welfare, not your own safety. That kind of empathy is rare, especially in someone your age." Noah stared out the window, considering this. I just couldn't stand hearing it cry. It sounded so scared and alone. The ranger nodded, letting the conversation lapse into comfortable silence as they turned onto a bumpy dirt road that followed the creek upstream from where the tunnel was located. After about 10 minutes, he pulled over in a small clearing. "This is one of our monitoring stations," he explained as they got out of the truck. "We keep track of wildlife movements, especially for protected species like black bears." Noah followed the ranger to a large tree, where a small, camouflaged camera was mounted about 8 feet off the ground. Ranger Holloway pulled out a tablet and began downloading data from the device. "Got some good activity here," he murmured, scrolling through the images. "Deer, raccoons, a few coyotes. Ah, here we go." He turned the tablet so Noah could see. The night vision camera had captured a mother bear and cub moving through the area just before dawn that very morning. Though the image was grainy and green-tinted, Noah immediately recognized Stella's distinctive shape and Pip's playful gait. "That's them," he exclaimed, a wave of relief washing over him. Seeing the bears moving naturally through their habitat, clearly recovered from their ordeal, lifted a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Sure is," the ranger confirmed. "They've moved their territory a bit uphill since the flood. Smart move on Stella's part. Bears have excellent memories for danger." As they continued checking monitoring stations throughout the afternoon, Ranger Holloway shared his extensive knowledge of the local ecosystem, pointing out signs of wildlife that Noah would have overlooked. A tuft of deer fur caught on a branch, the distinctive tracks of a fox in mud, a tree trunk scarred by a bear marking its territory. "The forest tells stories if you know how to read it," the ranger explained. "That's a big part of what we do, learning to listen to what the land and its inhabitants are telling us." At the final station, located on a ridge overlooking the valley, Ranger Holloway surprised Noah by pulling out a small pair of binoculars from his pack and handing them over. "These are for you," he said. "Not brand new, but good quality. I thought you might like to start observing wildlife from a safe distance." Noah accepted the gift with reverence, immediately raising them to his eyes and adjusting the focus as the ranger showed him. The world leaped closer, details sharpening with startling clarity. A woodpecker working industriously at a distant tree, the delicate structure of leaves unfurling in the spring warmth. "Thank you," he breathed, lowering the binoculars to look at Ranger Holloway with genuine gratitude. "I'll take good care of them." "I know you will," the ranger replied. "And speaking of taking care, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about." He sat down on a fallen log, motioning for Noah to join him. The view from their perch was spectacular. The entire valley spread out below them, the town of Pinewood looking like a miniature model in the distance. "Your grandmother mentioned you've had a tough couple of years," the ranger began carefully. "Losing your parents, moving to a new place, that's a lot for anyone to handle, especially someone your age." Noah stiffened slightly, his hands tightening around the binoculars. He wasn't used to discussing his parents with anyone but his grandmother. "What I've noticed," Ranger Holloway continued gently, "is that sometimes people who've experienced great loss develop an unusual capacity for compassion. It's as if their own pain opens them up to the suffering of others, even when those others aren't human." Noah swallowed hard, surprised by how accurately the ranger had described the feelings he'd struggled to understand himself. "After my parents died," he said quietly, "everything felt wrong, like the world was broken and nobody else could see it." He paused, searching for words. "But when I saw that bear cub in trouble, something just clicked inside me. For the first time since the accident, I knew exactly what I needed to do. It felt right." Ranger Holloway nodded, his weathered face kind. There's a concept in ecology called interdependence, the idea that all living things are connected, each playing a role in the health of the whole. Humans are part of that system too, though we often forget it. He gestured toward the valley below. What you did last week wasn't just about saving one bear cub. It was about recognizing your place in something larger than yourself. That's a profound thing, Noah, and not everyone gets there, even in a full lifetime. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, watching a hawk circle lazily in the cloudless sky above. Noah felt a curious sense of peace settle over him, not the absence of grief exactly, but something alongside it, like a seedling taking root in difficult soil. "I think I'd like to join the Junior Ranger program," he said finally, "if the offer still stands." Ranger Holloway's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "It absolutely does. We start the first Saturday in June." He checked his watch. "Speaking of time, we should head back. I promised your grandmother I'd have you home for dinner." As they made their way back to the truck, Noah paused to take one last look at the valley through his new binoculars. Through the lenses, he spotted movement at the forest edge. A large black shape followed by a smaller one, moving with purpose through the underbrush. "Ranger Holloway," he called excitedly. "I can see them." The ranger joined him, following his pointed finger. "Well, I'll be," he said softly. "Stella and Pip making their evening rounds." He placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Some might call that a coincidence. I like to think of it as nature's way of saying thanks." The evening sun cast long shadows across Eleanor Thompson's front yard as Ranger Holloway's truck pulled into the driveway. Noah jumped out, clutching his new binoculars to his chest, eager to tell his grandmother about spotting Stella and Pip in the wild. But his excitement faltered when he saw the unfamiliar black sedan parked beside his grandmother's old station wagon. Visitors weren't common at the Thompson household, especially not ones who drove sleek, expensive-looking cars with city license plates. "Expecting company?" Ranger Holloway asked, noticing Noah's hesitation. Noah shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. Want me to come in with you?" The ranger's offer was casual, but Noah could hear the protective note in his voice. "No, it's okay," Noah replied, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Probably just one of Grandma's friends." Ranger Holloway nodded. "All right then. Remember, Junior Rangers start in 3 weeks, and you can call me any time if you have questions about those binoculars." Noah waved goodbye as the truck pulled away, then took a deep breath and headed for the front door. Before he could reach for the handle, it swung open to reveal his grandmother, her expression a complicated mixture of emotions Noah couldn't quite read. "Noah, sweetheart, come in quickly," she said, ushering him inside with unusual urgency. "There's someone here to see us." The living room, normally a haven of comfortable clutter and familiar warmth, felt strangely formal today. A tall, slim woman in a charcoal gray suit sat perched on the edge of the sofa, a leather portfolio resting on her lap. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and rectangular glasses framed her sharp eyes. She stood as Noah entered, extending a manicured hand. "Hello, Noah. I'm Vivian Reynolds, your father's sister, your aunt." Noah stared at her in disbelief. His father had rarely spoken of his family, and Noah had assumed there were no relatives on that side. Certainly, none had come forward after the accident. I didn't know my dad had a sister," he said finally, reluctantly taking her cold hand in his. A tight smile crossed Vivian's face. "Robert and I weren't close in recent years, I'm afraid. A regrettable situation that I now hope to remedy with you." Eleanor placed a protective hand on Noah's shoulder. Miss Reynolds arrived about an hour ago, Noah. She's come from Boston." "All the way from Massachusetts?" Noah asked, struggling to process the sudden appearance of an unknown relative. Vivian nodded crisply. "Indeed. When I saw this in the news feeds, I realized I needed to come immediately." She opened her portfolio and withdrew a printout of the Pinewood Gazette article about Noah's bear cub rescue, complete with the photograph of him alongside Dr. Chen and Ranger Holloway. The article mentioned you were living with your paternal grandmother following your parents' tragic accident, Vivian continued. "I must say, I was quite shocked to discover that no one had informed me of my brother's death, nor of the existence of my nephew." Her accusing glance toward Eleanor made Noah bristle. His grandmother's cheeks flushed, but she kept her composure. "Robert was very clear about his wishes regarding his family of origin, Miss Reynolds," Eleanor said evenly. "I was simply respecting my son-in-law's decisions." Tension crackled in the air between the two women. Noah shifted uncomfortably, clutching his binoculars like a shield. "Yes, well," Vivian said dismissively, "the past is the past. What matters now is Noah's future." She turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've come to take you home with me, Noah. To Boston." The words hit Noah like a physical blow. "What?" "I've already spoken with my attorneys," Vivian continued smoothly. "As Robert's only sibling, I have a strong case for guardianship. You'll have opportunities in Boston that simply aren't available in a—" She glanced around the modest living room. Rural setting like this. Noah looked frantically at his grandmother, whose face had gone pale. "Grandma?" Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "Nothing has been decided, Noah. Miss Reynolds has made an offer, that's all. You've only just begun to settle here. I've enrolled you in Westfield Academy for the fall term." Vivian pressed on, as if Eleanor hadn't spoken. "It's one of the finest preparatory schools in New England. Your father attended before he chose to pursue his alternative lifestyle." The dismissive way she referred to his father's life, the wonderful, loving life he'd built with Noah's mother, sent a surge of anger through Noah. "My dad was happy. He loved his life." Vivian's expression softened slightly. "I'm sure he did, in his way, but Robert always had tremendous potential that he never fully realized. You have that same potential, Noah. I can see it in you. That remarkable courage you showed with the bear cub, that's the Reynolds spirit." She reached out as if to touch his face, but Noah stepped back, bumping into his grandmother. "I don't want to go to Boston," he said, hating how small his voice sounded. "I live here now, with Grandma." "Of course you feel that way at the moment," Vivian said indulgently. "Change is always frightening. But children adapt quickly, and you'll soon see that this is for the best. The Reynolds family has certain expectations, certain traditions." "Expectations my son-in-law deliberately left behind," Eleanor interrupted, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Robert and Sarah made me Noah's legal guardian in their will. They wanted him raised here, in a place they loved, close to nature and away from. Pressures they themselves found stifling." Vivian's smile disappeared, her expression hardening. "A small-town lawyer's will can be contested, Mrs. Thompson, especially when the child in question stands to inherit substantial family assets upon reaching adulthood, assets that should be properly managed by blood relatives in the meantime." Noah's confusion deepened. His parents had lived simply, his father working as a high school science teacher, his mother as a freelance illustrator. They'd never mentioned family wealth or inheritance. "What assets?" he asked, looking between the two women. Eleanor sighed. "Your father came from a wealthy family, Noah. The Reynolds shipping empire. But he walked away from all of that before you were born. He wanted a different life for himself and for you. A foolish, impulsive decision he might well have reversed had he lived, Vivian cut in sharply. Robert was always idealistic to a fault, but the Reynolds fortune rightfully belongs to the next generation. To you, Noah, and it must be properly managed until you're of age. The calculated gleam in his aunt's eyes made Noah deeply uncomfortable. There was something predatory in the way she looked at him, as if he were a valuable object rather than a person with feelings and choices of his own. "I think that's enough for today," Eleanor said firmly. "Noah has had a long afternoon, and this is a lot to process. We can continue this discussion tomorrow, Miss Reynolds." For a moment, it seemed Vivian might argue, but instead she nodded stiffly and gathered her portfolio. "Of course, I'll be staying at the Pinewood Inn for the next few days. My attorneys will be arriving tomorrow to begin the formal proceedings." She handed Eleanor a business card. "Should you wish to discuss matters more pragmatically before then?" As Eleanor showed Vivian to the door, Noah sank onto the couch, his mind reeling. The wonderful day with Ranger Holloway now seemed like it had happened to someone else, in another lifetime. How could everything change so quickly? Again? Eleanor returned and sat beside him, her hands twisting anxiously in her lap. "I'm so sorry, Noah. I never imagined she would find out about you." "Is it true?" Noah asked. "About my dad coming from a rich family?" His grandmother nodded sadly. "Yes. The Reynolds family owns one of the largest shipping companies on the East Coast. Very wealthy, very traditional, and very controlling. Your father left it all behind when he went to college and discovered his love of teaching and the natural world. He never looked back, and he never regretted his choice. And now, his sister wants me. After all this time." Noah couldn't keep the hurt and confusion from his voice. Where was she when it happened? Eleanor put her arm around him. "Robert hadn't spoken to his family in over 15 years, Noah. They disowned him when he married your mother and refused their attempts to bring him back into the family business. He changed his phone number several times because they wouldn't stop trying to contact him." "So, why does she want me now?" Noah asked, though a sinking feeling told him he already knew the answer. "The money," Eleanor said simply. "The Reynolds fortune passes through the male line. Your grandfather left provisions for any male descendants of his children, even if those children were estranged. As Robert's son, you'll inherit a significant portion when you turn 21. And she wants to control it until then," Noah finished bitterly. "I'm afraid so. Vivian has never married or had children of her own. You're her ticket to having a say in the family business." Eleanor squeezed his shoulder. "But don't worry. We'll fight this. The will your parents left is very clear." Noah leaned against his grandmother, drawing comfort from her familiar presence. "I don't care about the money. I don't want to leave you or Pinewood Valley. I'm just starting to feel like this could be home." Eleanor held him close. "I know, sweetheart. And I promise I'll do everything in my power to make sure this remains your home. But I want you to be prepared. Vivian Reynolds has resources and connections that I don't. This might get complicated." As if to emphasize her words, Noah's gaze fell on the newspaper article his aunt had left behind. His own face looked back at him, frozen in that moment of nervous pride as he stood between Dr. Chen and Ranger Holloway. The headline proclaimed him a hero, but right now he felt anything but heroic. Just a scared kid caught in the middle of the adult conflicts he barely understood. Yet something about seeing the image of himself beside the wildlife experts reminded him of how he'd felt in that moment by the flooded tunnel, determined, focused, unwilling to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. If he could face a raging flood and an anxious mother bear to save Pip, surely he could face his father's estranged sister and her attorneys. "Grandma," he said, sitting up straighter, "can we call Mr. Jenkins? He's a lawyer, right? Maybe he can help us." The ghost of a smile crossed Eleanor's worried face. "That's my brave boy. Yes, Harriet Jenkins is indeed a lawyer, a very good one, though she usually handles property disputes and wills, not custody battles, but she'll know who to call." She reached for the phone. "And after that, I think we should invite Ranger Holloway over for dinner tomorrow. The more friendly faces we have around, the better." As his grandmother dialed, Noah walked to the window and raised his new binoculars, focusing on the edge of the forest where the trees met their backyard. Though he knew it was unlikely, part of him hoped to catch another glimpse of Stella and Pip, a reminder of the connection he'd felt to this place, to the natural world his father had loved so much. The trees stood silent and still in the fading light, revealing no wildlife secrets. But as Noah lowered the binoculars, a sense of resolve settled over him. Pip had fought against the flood with everything his tiny body possessed, refusing to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. Noah would do the same. Boston and Westfield Academy and the Reynolds fortune could wait. His place was here, where his parents had wanted him to be, where he was just beginning to heal, where a bear cub and an old ranger and a small town had shown him that courage came in many forms, and that the most valuable connections had nothing to do with money or status or power. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but the peaceful atmosphere of Eleanor's cottage had been replaced by a tense energy that seemed to vibrate in the very walls. Noah had slept poorly, his dreams filled with swirling water and the faces of strangers in expensive suits trying to drag him away from his grandmother. He found Eleanor at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of papers, photo albums, documents, letters, all spread out in organized chaos. She looked up as he entered, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept even less than he had. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, attempting a cheerful tone that fell slightly flat. "I've been going through everything your parents left, looking for anything that might help us." Noah poured himself a bowl of cereal and sat across from her. "Did you find anything?" Eleanor sighed, pushing a hand through her silver hair. "Some things. Letters your father wrote about his decision to leave the Reynolds family, photos of them trying to build a life away from that influence." She hesitated. "And this." She slid a formal-looking document toward him. Noah skimmed it. His reading skills advanced for his age, but still struggling with some of the legal terminology. "It's your parents' will," Eleanor explained gently. "They made it when you were born. It explicitly names me as your guardian should anything happen to them both. But Vivian has more money and fancier lawyers," Noah finished, a hard knot forming in his stomach. Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Money isn't everything in these cases, Noah. The courts consider what's in the best interest of the child. You've already lost so much. Uprooting you again, sending you to strangers would clearly not be in your best interest." The doorbell rang, startling them both. Eleanor glanced at the clock with a frown. "That can't be Harriet already. It's not even 8. Noah followed his grandmother to the door, hanging back slightly as she opened it to reveal not Harriet Jenkins but Dr. Olivia Chen, looking somewhat apologetic in her casual weekend clothes rather than her wildlife center uniform. "I'm sorry to drop by so early," Dr. Chen said, "but I heard about the situation from Mike, Ranger Holloway, and thought I might be able to help." Eleanor visibly relaxed, stepping back to welcome the wildlife biologist. "No apology necessary, Doctor." "Chen, We can use all the friends we can get right now." Dr. Chen smiled warmly at Noah as she entered. "And please call me Olivia. I feel like we're all part of the same team now." In the kitchen, Olivia accepted a cup of coffee while studying the papers spread across the table. "Mike filled me in on the basics," she said. "Your sister-in-law has suddenly appeared, claiming guardianship rights because of a family inheritance." Eleanor nodded wearily. "That's the gist of it. Vivian Reynolds hasn't shown the slightest interest in Noah until now, but suddenly she's determined to take him back to Boston and enroll him in some exclusive private school, the same one that made her brother, my son-in-law, so unhappy that he cut ties with his entire family." "And what does Noah want?" Olivia asked, looking directly at him. The simple question, so straightforwardly asked, brought a lump to Noah's throat. So much of the discussion had been about legal rights and family obligations that it felt strangely validating to have someone simply ask for his preference. "I want to stay here," he said firmly, "with Grandma. I'm going to be a junior ranger this summer. I just got these binoculars." He gestured to the prized possession he'd left on the counter. "I don't know anything about Boston or shipping companies or being rich." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I thought you'd say." She turned to Eleanor. "Which is why I brought this." From her messenger bag, she produced a folder with the Wildlife Conservation Center's logo on it. "Our center has been developing a special educational program for gifted students with an interest in environmental science and wildlife conservation. It's highly selective, with specialized mentoring and field experience opportunities that aren't available anywhere else in the country." She slid the folder toward Noah. "And we'd like to offer you one of our scholarship positions, starting this summer and continuing through your high school years." Noah stared at her in disbelief, then at the folder, which contained glossy brochures showing students his age working alongside scientists in forests, mountains, and coastal areas. "But why me?" he stammered. "I'm not special." Olivia's expression grew serious. "What you did for Pip took extraordinary courage, empathy, and quick thinking, exactly the qualities we look for in our program candidates. Your actions demonstrated a natural connection to wildlife that can't be taught in any classroom, even at the most exclusive private school in Boston." She turned to Eleanor. "The program includes substantial academic components: science, mathematics, writing, research methodologies, all framed within environmental education. Participants typically score in the top percentiles on standardized tests and have excellent college acceptance rates." Understanding dawned on Eleanor's face. "You're creating an educational opportunity that would be considered equal to or better than what Vivian is offering." "Exactly," Olivia confirmed. "One that's uniquely available to Noah here in Pinewood Valley, and that directly builds on strengths and interests he's already demonstrating. From a legal standpoint, it significantly weakens any argument that moving him to Boston would provide superior educational advantages." Noah flipped through the brochure with growing excitement. There were pictures of students tracking wildlife with radio equipment, collecting water samples from streams, even helping to rehabilitate injured animals. Would I get to work with bears?" he asked hesitantly. Olivia smiled. "Eventually, yes. Our advanced students participate in all aspects of our conservation work, including monitoring and research on local bear populations." Her expression softened. "And I happen to know that our team has a particular interest in continuing to study Stella and Pip's progress." The front door opened without a knock, and Harriet Jenkins strode in, briefcase in hand, followed by her husband. Both were still in their weekend clothes, Mr. Jenkins in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, Mrs. Jenkins in a comfortable sweater and slacks. but there was a professional sharpness to Mrs. Jenkins' expression that transformed her from neighborhood friend to formidable attorney. "Sorry we didn't ring," she said briskly. "Saw Olivia's car outside and figured this was becoming a strategy session." Eleanor quickly made introductions and explained Olivia's proposal. Mrs. Jenkins listened intently, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "This is excellent," she said when Eleanor finished. "Absolutely excellent. It directly counters one of the strongest arguments Vivian's attorneys would make, that Boston offers educational opportunities Noah can't access here." She turned to Noah, her usually stern face softening slightly. "Now, young man, I need you to tell me everything you remember about your father talking about his family. Anything at all, even if it seems unimportant." Noah wrinkled his forehead in concentration. He didn't talk about them much. Sometimes when I asked about his parents, he'd just say they lived far away and had different ideas about what was important in life. "Did he ever mention Vivian specifically?" Mrs. Jenkins pressed. Noah thought hard. "Once, I think. Mom had gotten a letter and she seemed upset. When I asked what was wrong, Dad said something like, 'Vivian never knows when to quit.' But then they noticed me listening and changed the subject." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, making another note. "That fits with what Eleanor told me. Robert deliberately removed himself from the Reynolds family influence and maintained that separation throughout his adult life." Mr. Jenkins, who had been quietly examining the will, looked up. "The document is solidly drafted. It explicitly names Eleanor as guardian and includes language about their desire for Noah to be raised with values of simplicity, connection to nature, and freedom from materialistic pressures." That's a direct quote. "Unfortunately," Mrs. Jenkins added, "wills can be contested, and the Reynolds family certainly has the resources to drag this through the courts. Our best approach is to demonstrate that Noah is thriving here, that his parents' wishes are being honored, and that the educational opportunities provided by Olivia's program are exceptional." The doorbell rang again. Eleanor sighed. "It's like Grand Central Station today." Noah went to answer it this time, finding Ranger Holloway on the porch, holding a cardboard box and looking unusually formal in a pressed uniform rather than his typical field clothes. "Morning, Noah," he said with a gentle smile. "Thought I might drop by and see how you're holding up." Noah stepped back to let him in. "Everyone's in the kitchen making plans. Aunt Vivian's lawyers are coming today." The ranger's expression darkened slightly. "So, I heard. That's why I brought a few things that might help." In the kitchen, after greeting everyone, Ranger Holloway placed the box on the table and began removing its contents. Official-looking papers, photographs, and a small digital recorder. "I took the liberty of contacting our district wildlife management office," he explained. "Noah's bear cub rescue has actually created quite a bit of interest in professional circles. We've received requests from 2 university research programs and a National Conservation Foundation for more information about the incident and Noah's involvement." He handed several letters to Mrs. Jenkins, who skimmed them with growing interest. "These organizations are inquiring about interviews with Noah, possible inclusion in research papers, even scholarship considerations for future environmental studies programs." "That aligns perfectly with what I'm proposing," Olivia said excitedly. "It shows that Noah's actions have created unique educational and professional development opportunities that are specifically tied to this location." Ranger Holloway nodded. "Exactly. And there's more." He held up the small recorder. "With the director's permission, I've brought something from our research archives. It's a recording made about 5 years ago by a wildlife biologist studying black bear behavior in our region." He pressed play, and a professional female voice filled the room. Subject 117B. Female black bear, approximately 6 years of age, displays unusual tolerance of human proximity. Unlike most specimens in the study area, 117B shows no aggression when observers maintain the standard safety distance and actually appears curious rather than threatened by human presence. This behavioral anomaly may indicate previous positive human interactions or simply an individual temperament variation. Further observation is recommended. The ranger stopped the recording. Subject 117B is Stella. She's been known to our department for years as a bear with unusually non-aggressive tendencies toward humans, though we've always maintained appropriate caution, of course. So, when she seemed to recognize that Noah was helping her cub, Eleanor began. "It's not as far-fetched as it might sound," Ranger Holloway confirmed. "Stella has demonstrated higher-than-average intelligence and adaptability throughout our observation of her. The fact that Noah encountered this particular bear, one with an established history of unusual human tolerance, makes his experience even more scientifically significant." Mrs. Jenkins was making notes rapidly now. "This is gold," she murmured. "Absolutely gold. It establishes that Noah's experience wasn't just a lucky accident, but a scientifically significant event with educational implications that cannot be replicated elsewhere." The mounting evidence of Noah's unique situation in Pinewood Valley was beginning to feel overwhelming, but in a positive way. For the first time since Vivian's arrival, he felt a flicker of real hope. These adults, his grandmother and these new friends who had rallied around them, were fighting for him with everything they had, just as he had fought for Pip. The positive atmosphere was interrupted by the harsh ring of Eleanor's phone. She answered it, her expression clouding as she listened. "Yes, I understand." "No, that won't be necessary. We'll meet you there." She hung up, her hands slightly unsteady. "That was Vivian. Her attorneys have arrived earlier than expected. She wants us to meet them at the town hall at noon to discuss arrangements, as if everything's already decided." Mrs. Jenkins straightened her shoulders. "Perfect. I was hoping for a face-to-face meeting before they filed any formal papers. This gives us the advantage of surprise." "Should I come too?" Noah asked anxiously. The adults exchanged glances, and it was Ranger Holloway who spoke. "I think you should, Noah. This is about your life, after all. But you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Sometimes just being present makes a powerful statement." Eleanor looked at the clock. "That gives us about 3 hours to prepare. Mrs. Jenkins, Harriet, what else do we need?" The lawyer thought for a moment. "Character witnesses would be helpful. People from the community who can speak to how well Noah is adjusting here, his connection to the area, the positive impact of his current environment." "I can call Noah's teacher," Eleanor suggested, "and perhaps Dr. Abernathy, who's been helping Noah with his anxiety since the accident." "Good," Harriet nodded. "And Noah, do you have any friends from school who might want to show support?" Noah thought of Lily Morgan and Tommy Fletcher, who had invited him to sit with them at lunch after the bear-cub story broke. They weren't close friends yet, but they'd been friendly. "Maybe a couple," he said hesitantly. "Call them," Harriet advised. "The more community support we can demonstrate, the stronger our position." As the adults continued planning, Noah slipped outside onto the back porch, needing a moment alone to process everything. The morning sun had burned away the last of the mist from the fields behind his grandmother's house, and in the distance, the forest stood vibrant and green against the blue sky. He raised his binoculars, scanning the tree line out of habit now, rather than any real expectation of seeing wildlife. To his surprise, movement caught his attention. a dark shape moving along the edge of the woods, too large for a deer, too graceful for a random shadow. Noah's heart leaped as he recognized Stella's distinctive form. The mother bear paused at the forest edge, seeming to look directly toward the house, toward him. Beside her, Pip gamboled playfully, apparently fully recovered from his ordeal in the flooded tunnel. For a breathless moment, Noah felt that same connection he had experienced during the rescue, a wordless understanding that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild animal. Then Stella turned, nudging her cub gently back into the protective cover of the trees, and they were gone. Noah lowered the binoculars, a strange calm settling over him. Somehow, seeing Stella and Pip thriving in their natural habitat, the habitat his father had loved, the place his parents had chosen for their family, strengthened his resolve. This was where he belonged, where he could carry forward the legacy his parents had wanted for him. With newfound determination, he went back inside to help prepare for the confrontation with Vivian Reynolds and her high-powered attorneys. Whatever happened next, he would face it with the same courage he had found within himself on that stormy day by the flooded tunnel. Not just for himself, but for the memory of his parents and for the future they had dreamed for him. A future connected to nature, to compassion, and to the quiet strength that came from knowing exactly who you were meant to be. The town hall of Pinewood Valley was a modest brick building that had served as the community's gathering place for over a century. Its meeting room, with rows of wooden chairs facing a raised platform with a long table, had witnessed countless local debates, celebrations, and decisions. Today, it would host a different kind of confrontation, one that would determine Noah Thompson's future. Noah sat between his grandmother and Mrs. Jenkins, trying not to fidget in the uncomfortable suit Eleanor had hastily ironed for him that morning. It had been his father's last gift before the accident, bought for a cousin's wedding they'd never attended. The sleeves were slightly too short now, a physical reminder of how life had continued to move forward, even as grief had sometimes made time feel frozen. Across the aisle, Vivian Reynolds sat rigidly beside two stern-looking men in expensive suits, their leather briefcases placed precisely beside their polished shoes. Vivian wore a tailored navy dress with a single strand of pearls, her hair immaculately styled, every inch the Boston aristocrat. She smiled tightly when she caught Noah looking at her, a smile that never reached her cold eyes. Behind Noah and Eleanor sat their assembled supporters, Ranger Holloway in his formal uniform, Dr. Chen in professional attire, Mr. Jenkins, Noah's teacher, Mrs. Winters, Dr. Abernathy, the child psychologist, and to Noah's surprise, several classmates, including Lily Morgan and Tommy Fletcher, accompanied by their parents. The unexpected show of support from people he barely knew brought a lump to his throat. Mayor Green, a jovial man with a receding hairline and perpetually rolled-up sleeves, entered through a side door, looking somewhat bewildered by the formal assembly in his usually casual meeting space. "Folks," he began, settling into the center chair at the raised table, "I want to be clear that this isn't a legal proceeding. I agreed to provide a neutral space for this discussion as a courtesy to all involved, but any decisions about the guardianship of a minor would have to go through proper family court channels." "We understand, Mayor," one of Vivian's attorneys responded smoothly. "We simply thought a preliminary discussion might help clarify positions and potentially avoid unnecessary legal complications." His tone suggested that such complications would be decidedly unpleasant for anyone opposing his client. The mayor nodded. "In that case, why don't we begin with Ms. Reynolds stating her intentions, followed by Mrs. Thompson, and we'll proceed from there." Vivian straightened in her seat, touching her pearls lightly before speaking. "Thank you, Mayor Green. My intention is quite straightforward. As Robert Reynolds' only sibling, and Noah's closest blood relative, I am seeking legal guardianship of my nephew. The Reynolds family can provide Noah with advantages and opportunities that simply aren't available in his current situation: premier education, cultural experiences, social connections, and, of course, proper management of his inheritance until he comes of age. She turned slightly to face Noah, her expression softening in a way that somehow seemed calculated. I understand this must feel overwhelming, Noah, but I assure you, this is what your father would have wanted if he had taken time to reconsider his impulsive decisions. The Reynolds name carries significant weight in Boston, and as the last male heir, you have a responsibility to that legacy. Mrs. Jenkins made a small note on her legal pad, her lips pressed into a thin line. Noah could almost feel her restraining herself from interrupting. Mayor Green nodded. "Thank you, Miss Reynolds. Mrs. Thompson, would you like to respond?" Eleanor took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Yes, thank you. I'd first like to clarify that I am not merely Noah's current caretaker or a stopgap solution. I am his legal guardian, explicitly named in my daughter and son-in-law's will, which was properly executed and filed." She gestured to Mr. Jenkins, who held up the document for emphasis. "Robert and Sarah were absolutely clear about their wishes for Noah's upbringing," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger. "They wanted him raised in a natural environment, away from the pressures and materialism that had caused Robert so much unhappiness in his own childhood. They chose Pinewood Valley deliberately, purchasing land here years before their accident with the intention of building a permanent home." She turned to look at Noah, love and fierce protectiveness evident in her expression. "In the 10 months since coming to live with me, Noah has begun to heal from the devastating loss of his parents. He's finding his place in our community, developing important connections to nature and wildlife, and demonstrating remarkable character and courage, as witnessed in his recent rescue of the bear cub that many of you have read about." At the mention of the rescue, there was a murmur of approval from the assembled townspeople. Noah felt his cheeks warm but sat a little straighter, drawing strength from their support. One of Vivian's attorneys leaned forward. "If I may, Mayor Green, while Mrs. Thompson's affection for her grandson is admirable, we must consider what's objectively best for the child's future. The resources available to Noah as part of the Reynolds family far exceed anything possible here. Westfield Academy consistently places graduates in Ivy League universities. The cultural and social advantages of Boston are self-evident, and the management of Noah's substantial inheritance, which will include voting shares in Reynolds Shipping upon his majority, requires sophisticated financial oversight that simply isn't available in a rural community." The slight pause before rural carried a distinct note of condescension that rippled through the room, raising hackles among the Pinewood Valley residents. Mayor Green seemed about to respond when Mrs. Jenkins stood, her diminutive height belying her commanding presence. "If I may address these points directly, Mayor," at his nod, she continued, "I'm Harriet Jenkins, attorney for Eleanor Thompson, and, by extension, for Noah's interests. I'd like to systematically address the claims made by Ms. Reynolds and her counsel." She picked up a folder. "First, regarding educational opportunities. Noah has been offered a place in the Wildlife Conservation Center's prestigious Young Naturalist Scholar Program." She distributed copies of Olivia's proposal to the mayor and Vivian's attorneys. This nationally recognized program provides specialized mentoring in environmental sciences, advanced field research opportunities, and academic instruction that consistently produces students who score in the top percentiles on standardized tests and achieve impressive college placements. Dr. Chen rose briefly when mentioned, lending her professional presence to the claim. "Furthermore," Mrs. Jenkins continued, Noah's bear cub rescue has generated interest from multiple university research programs and conservation organizations. She produced the letters Ranger Holloway had brought. These institutions recognize the unique qualities Noah demonstrated during that incident, qualities that have created educational and professional development paths specifically tied to this location and community. Vivian's attorneys exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this level of organized opposition from what they had likely dismissed as a small-town grandmother and her rural supporters. Mrs. Jenkins wasn't finished. Regarding the matter of Noah's inheritance and the management thereof, I've taken the liberty of consulting with financial experts regarding the specific requirements of trust management. She produced another document. While Reynolds Shipping is indeed a significant corporation, the voting shares Noah will inherit are held in trust with Boston Federal Bank as the primary administrator, not the guardian. This arrangement was explicitly established by Noah's grandfather to prevent exactly the kind of situation we're facing today. Family members seeking guardianship for financial control rather than the child's welfare. A flash of anger crossed Vivian's perfectly composed face, quickly masked. One of her attorneys whispered something in her ear, causing her to frown slightly before regaining her neutral expression. Finally, Mrs. Jenkins continued, and perhaps most importantly, we must consider the expressed wishes of Noah's parents and the emotional well-being of the child himself. She held up Robert and Sarah Thompson's will. This legally executed document explicitly names Eleanor Thompson as Noah's guardian. It includes specific language about their desire for their son to be raised in a natural environment, away from what they termed the materialism and status consciousness of the Reynolds family culture. She turned to face Vivian directly. "Ms. Reynolds, when was the last time you had any contact with your brother before his death?" Vivian shifted uncomfortably. "As I mentioned, Robert and I were estranged, a situation I deeply regret." "Please answer the question," Mrs. Jenkins pressed. "Approximately 15 years ago," Vivian admitted reluctantly. "And in those 15 years, did you make any attempt to reconcile with your brother, to meet his wife, to even learn of your nephew's existence?" "The estrangement was mutual," Vivian replied stiffly. "Robert made it quite clear he wanted nothing to do with our family." Mrs. Jenkins nodded. "And yet now, 10 months after his death, you suddenly feel qualified to override his explicit wishes regarding his son's upbringing." She allowed the question to hang in the air before continuing. "Mayor Green, I would also like to call attention to something beyond legal documentation. I'd like to call on several community members to speak briefly to Noah's integration into Pinewood Valley and the support system that has developed around him." The mayor nodded, and Mrs. Winters, Noah's teacher, stood first. She spoke warmly about Noah's academic progress, his growing friendships at school, and the positive change she'd observed in him since the bear cub incident. Dr. Abernathy followed, offering professional insight into the psychological importance of stability and community connection for a child who had experienced traumatic loss. Ranger Holloway's testimony was particularly compelling, describing Noah's natural affinity for wildlife and the unique circumstances of the bear rescue that had demonstrated his exceptional character. He played the recording about Stella's unusual behavior again, emphasizing the scientific significance of Noah's experience with this particular bear. "This isn't just about a heartwarming story," the ranger concluded. "Noah has established a connection to this ecosystem that has genuine scientific and conservation value. Removing him from this environment would not only disrupt his healing process but would deprive our wildlife management programs of a promising young contributor." Throughout these testimonials, Noah watched Vivian's expression grow increasingly tight. her attorneys leaning together for whispered conferences. The tide seemed to be turning against them, and Noah felt a tentative hope beginning to bloom. Finally, Mayor Green asked, would Noah himself like to say anything? It seems only right that we hear from the young man at the center of all this. All eyes turned to Noah, who felt his stomach clench with sudden nervousness. He hadn't expected to speak, but looking at the supportive faces around him, his grandmother, Ranger Holloway, Dr. Chen, his new friends from school, he found the courage to stand. I don't remember much about my dad's family, he began hesitantly. He never talked about them, except once when he told my mom that some things are more important than money or status. He said the best thing he ever did was leave Boston to become a teacher, because that's how he met my mom and got to live near the forests he loved. Noah took a deep breath, his voice growing steadier. After my parents died, everything felt wrong, like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. But here, in Pinewood Valley, I'm starting to feel like I could belong again. When I helped save Pip, the bear cub, it was the first time since the accident that I felt like I was doing something that mattered, something my parents would have been proud of. He looked directly at his aunt, trying to see past her cold exterior to whatever remained of his father's sister underneath. I'm sorry you and my dad weren't close, and I'm sorry you didn't get to know him the way he really was. But taking me away from Grandma and Pinewood Valley won't bring him back or make things right. It would just mean taking me away from the life he wanted for me, from the place where I'm finally starting to heal. The room was silent when he finished, the simple honesty of his words hanging in the air. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Vivian stood up. I'd like to speak with my nephew, she said, her voice surprisingly soft. Privately, if that's acceptable. Eleanor looked alarmed, but Noah nodded slowly. It's okay, Grandma. I want to hear what she has to say. Mayor Green directed them to a small office adjacent to the meeting room. As the door closed behind them, Noah found himself alone with the aunt he hadn't known existed until yesterday. Vivian stood awkwardly by the window, her perfect composure finally showing cracks. You speak well, she said at last. Clearly and from the heart. Robert was like that too. Noah said nothing, waiting. I didn't come here just for the company shares, Vivian continued, not looking at him. Though I won't pretend they weren't a factor. But when I saw your photograph in that article, you look so much like him. Like Robert at your age. It was like seeing a ghost. She turned then, and Noah was startled to see genuine emotion in her eyes. I thought I could make things right somehow. That raising his son might make up for all the years I didn't try to reach out to him. Did you miss him? Noah asked simply. The question seemed to catch Vivian off guard. Yes, more than I realized until he was gone. We were close as children before he rebelled against Father's plans. He was always the brave one, the one who questioned things I took for granted. She moved to sit in one of the office chairs, her expensive suit incongruous against the worn municipal furniture. When I saw what you did for that bear cub, the courage that took, the compassion, I knew you were truly Robert's son. She sighed deeply, and I knew, if I'm honest with myself, that he would hate what I'm trying to do now. Noah sat across from her, studying her face. Despite her cold demeanor, he could see traces of his father there, in the shape of her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. You could still get to know me, he offered cautiously. Not as my guardian, but as my aunt. You could visit sometimes. I'd like to hear stories about my dad when he was young. Surprise flickered across Vivian's face, followed by something softer. You would want that? Even after I tried to take you away from your home. Noah thought about it honestly. I don't have much family left, and Dad must have loved you once, before everything went wrong. I think he'd want us to try at least. For the first time, a genuine smile transformed Vivian's stern features, revealing a glimpse of the sister his father might have known. You're remarkably generous, Noah. You must get that from your mother. Mom always said life's too short for grudges, Noah replied, the memory bringing both pain and comfort. And she said everyone deserves a second chance if they're truly sorry. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, then she stood decisively. I need to speak with my attorneys. When they returned to the meeting room, the gathered townspeople looked up expectantly. Vivian walked directly to her legal team, conferred briefly with them, and then addressed Mayor Green. In light of my nephew's eloquent testimony and the evident community support for his current placement, I am withdrawing any claim for guardianship. Her voice was clear and firm. My attorneys will formalize this decision immediately. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Eleanor clasped Noah's hand tightly, tears shining in her eyes. I would, however, Vivian continued, like to establish a structured visitation arrangement, if Mrs. Thompson is amenable. I believe it would benefit Noah to maintain connections with his paternal family while respecting his parents' wishes regarding his upbringing. Eleanor nodded, caution mingling with tentative acceptance. I think that could be arranged, with Noah's best interests as the priority. Mayor Green looked pleasantly surprised by this peaceful resolution. Well, this is certainly a more positive outcome than I anticipated. Mrs. Jenkins, perhaps you and Ms. Reynolds' attorneys can work out the details of this arrangement. As the meeting broke up, with Pinewood Valley residents clustering around Eleanor and Noah to offer congratulations, Vivian approached them once more. I'd like to offer my sincere apologies, Mrs. Thompson, for the distress I've caused, she said formally, and to you, Noah, for prioritizing my own agenda over your well-being. Eleanor's expression remained guarded, but she nodded acknowledgement. Thank you for recognizing what's truly best for Noah. Vivian hesitated, then added more softly, I have a small album of photographs of Robert as a child and teenager. Things you might like to see, Noah. Perhaps I could bring it on my first visit. I'd like that, Noah said genuinely. I don't have many pictures of Dad when he was young. As Vivian departed with her legal team, Noah felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that he would stay with his grandmother in Pinewood Valley, curiosity about the aunt and family history he was just beginning to discover, and a deep sense of belonging to this community that had rallied around him. Ranger Holloway approached, resting a hand on Noah's shoulder. Proud of you, son. Takes a special kind of courage to offer understanding to someone who's wronged you. Noah thought about Pip, how the frightened cub had eventually trusted him despite its fear, how Stella had recognized his intentions despite the natural boundaries between their species. I think I'm learning that courage comes in different forms, he said thoughtfully. Sometimes it's rescuing someone from danger, but sometimes it's just being willing to trust again after you've been hurt. The ranger nodded approvingly. Wise words. Speaking of courage and trust, I got a call from our wildlife monitoring team this morning. Stella and Pip have established a new territory about 2 miles upstream from where the rescue happened. They're doing well. Pip's growing fast and learning to fish in the calmer pools. Noah's face lit up at this news. Could we go see them sometime? From a safe distance, I mean. I think that could be arranged, Ranger Holloway said with a smile. In fact, our junior ranger program starts next week. One of our projects this summer is tracking several local bear families to study how they've adapted after the flood. You'd be a natural for that team. As they left the town hall, stepping into the bright summer sunshine, Noah walked between his grandmother and the ranger, feeling truly secure for the first time since losing his parents. The path ahead wasn't perfect or without challenges. There were still grief and adjustments and complicated family relationships to navigate. But he was no longer adrift. Like Pip emerging from the flooded tunnel, Noah had passed through the darkest waters and found his way to solid ground, surrounded by those who would help him grow strong and find his place in the world. And somewhere in the forests that bordered Pinewood Valley, Stella and her cub continued their own journey, their lives forever intertwined with his in ways that transcended the usual boundaries between humans and wildlife. The tunnel that had nearly claimed Pip's life had instead become a passage to something new, for the bears, for Noah, and for an entire community that had witnessed the power of one child's compassionate courage in the face of danger. It was a story that would be told in Pinewood Valley for years to come, a reminder that sometimes the smallest actions could create the most profound changes, rippling outward in ways no one could predict, healing wounds both seen and unseen. And whenever Noah raised his binoculars to scan the forest edge, hoping for a glimpse of his bear friends, he carried with him the knowledge that some connections, once formed, remained unbroken, bridges between different worlds, different species, and different generations, all surviving together through life's inevitable storms.